Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Atlantic Council. My name is Peter Schechter, and I'm the director of the Adrian Arsh Latin America program. And it's great to have you here. My favorite events are afternoon events when we can have wine and cheese and have some snacks. So I hope you're enjoying the wine. We'll have a really interesting and fun program tonight. It gives me huge pleasure to welcome some really important guests today. First, we're so pleased to host Inter-American Development Bank President Luis Alberto Moreno. Luis Alberto and I have known each other for many, many years. I'm privileged to call him a friend. He's somebody who I admire greatly, and I learn always from him. We also want to welcome Bridget Helms, the General Manager of the IDB's Multilateral Investment Fund. And we're particularly excited to partner today's events to present a short film on social entrepreneurs in Colombia. And I want to thank and welcome Ben Powell, the CEO of Agora, and his team for giving the Arsh Center the privilege and the honor of having our think tank turn into a movie house to show this film, The Disruptors, Reimagining Business in Latin America. The film and the story that it presents encapsulates absolutely the mission of our center here at the Atlantic Council. We try to focus on Latin America's profound, deep, positive transformations over the last 2 decades. Latin America is already the U.S.'s third, fastest growing trading partner, and as the region's political and socioeconomic successes and conditions continue to improve, the partnerships with other nations, whether it is U.S. or Europe or Asia, will become stronger yet. And Colombia is a really great example of strong, resilient democratic institutions, an active and free press, and important for today's film, an engaged business and civil society that is in stark contrast to some of Colombia's neighbors. The film will highlight these points and the role of disruptors in as Colombia builds its societies. As the peace deal with the FARC becomes more real, the challenge will be to reconnect 2 priorities which have been far too separate for far too long: the priority of economic development and the priority of developing the country. This is the key question of Colombia's future, and one that we'll be discussing as we chat today, which is how can the country balance peace, social inclusion, and economic progress all at the same time. So I know you all are anxious to watch the film and move on. So before that, I want to introduce Bridget Helms, and I want to ask you to give some remarks. And then I'll have the pleasure of discussing the film that we're going to see with Luis Alberto Moreno and Agora's CEO, Ben Powell. Bridget Helms, prior to joining the Multilateral Investment Fund, served as the director of SPEED, a USAID-funded program in Mozambique, seeking to improve the business environment in that country. Dr. Helms was a senior expert for financial inclusion at McKinsey & Company. She also spent 4 years with the International Finance Corporation, where she led the organization's advisory services and work in Indonesia. And I also just learned that she and I are both graduates of the same institution, and we missed each other by 2 years. Bridget, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here. Please.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thanks very much, President Moreno, for being here with us. Entrepreneurship is not about creating change. Sorry. Entrepreneurship is about creating change, not just creating companies. You may be surprised to hear that it was Mark Zuckerberg who said that a couple weeks ago at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit. Not someone who's necessarily associated with social entrepreneurship, but rather entrepreneurship as it's more broadly understood. That panel was moderated by Barack Obama and featured Mariana Costa, who's a CEO and co-founder of Laboratoria. Laboratoria is an organization that's very close to the heart of the IDB group as well as Agora. It's a fantastic organization that takes low-income women that haven't had opportunities in education and many times are working as domestic help or in the local sort of informal shop on the corner, and turns them into coders in 6 months. 70% of these women get great jobs and multiply their income by an average of 3.2%. 80% of the employers give them 80% approval ratings. And Laboratoria is working in Peru, it's working in Mexico, it's working in Chile, and they're very ambitious. They want to have 10,000 coders, 10,000 coders by 2020. This Laboratoria has benefited from the IDB Group's support in many different ways, both indirectly through Agora, directly through our demand solutions venture night last year, and directly through the Multilateral Investment Fund. But what's exciting about them is that we know that they are going to change the world one girl at a time. And of a movement that is exploding in Latin America and the Caribbean. As we know, it's a very young population. A fifth of the population of the region is between 15 and 24 years old, and they're receiving more and more education and more opportunities to really make a difference by using market forces to create solutions to social, economic, and environmental problems. And in fact, many entrepreneurs in Latin America and the Caribbean are already taking advantage of this opportunity. In our region, we have 3% of the working population involved already in social entrepreneurship, and that's pretty close to the US, which is at 5%. Have you heard of B Corp in this group? I'm pretty sure. So these are benefit corporations, and there's an organization called B Lab that certifies companies to make sure that they have economic and social and environmental impact, and also transparency and all these other types of things. There are 240 certified B Corps in Latin America, and we're likely to have 350 by the end of the year, and they're likely to grow by 50% every year. So this is something that is happening in our region. The Multilateral Investment Fund, the MIF, is very active in supporting social entrepreneurship and impact investing in the region. You may know that we've invested in a number of venture capital funds. We are invested in 50 funds right now across the region, and all of them adhere to what we call GIN, or Global Impact Investing Network indicators. We also have a number of funds that are specifically oriented to social entrepreneurship. At the same time, we understand development entrepreneurs that determined that the growth in revenue and jobs in those social entrepreneurs that went through an accelerator program was 3 times higher than those that didn't get into the programs. So it really does make a difference. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Agora right now. Agora accelerates early stage and growth stage companies that are intentionally making a difference in terms of social and environmental impact. Since its launching in 2011, Agora has provided acceleration to 100 companies. 89% of them are still going, which in and of itself is a huge achievement. Those of you who are familiar with entrepreneurship will understand that. 12 of them have received the B Corp certification that I talked about just now. And on average, they've achieved a 41% revenue growth per year, which is quite astounding. They've raised $47 million, and they have created over 5,000 jobs. So a very successful experiment indeed. And this track record is what's led us to invest directly with Agora. And over the next 3 years, we hope to create an additional 140. You'll be able to see how they really make a difference in the lives of those who are often overlooked in Colombia. They're really redefining the role of business and their communities, and they're paving the way for a peaceful and prosperous Colombia. So I hope you'll join me in watching the film. Thank you.
Colombia, a nation rising up and recovering from the scourge of decades of violence. In the cities, the divide between rich and poor is stark. But the streets pulse with a spirit of hope and change. It's the perfect testing ground for an inspiring new wave of entrepreneurship. Businesses that blend profit with purpose. The story of one of those companies begins in Bogota, at one of the biggest, busiest markets in South America. In the midst of the bedlam and balancing acts, two dynamic young entrepreneurs are using business to change the world, one plantain at a time. Carolina Medina and Verena Lietkens met at the London School of Economics. Now, as co-founders of a startup called Agrupa, they're bootstrapping it in Bogota and doing their part to solve the global food crisis. Their mission? To help people get access to fresh, healthy food at cheaper prices.
Agrupa is a social business that works with mom and pop shops in low-income neighborhoods in Bogota. Our goal is that in having them receive better prices for their fruits and vegetables, they will also react to this, offering better prices to their end consumers, who will then have access to cheaper fruits and vegetables and hopefully opt for buying the healthier option.
Street vendors and mom and pop shops are the gatekeepers of what people eat in low-income neighborhoods. They sell 3/4 of the food in Colombia.
We know they're spending around 15 hours per week and around 20% of their income only in transportation to go to the central market.
They usually get up around 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning because they're trying to be back at their shop at 7 or 8 to open it. And they spend all day in their shop until they close around 10 or 11 at night. It's a really tough job, and that's 7 days a week.
Agrupa works to save the vendors time and money. Shop owners text orders to Verena. At dawn, she and her driver hit the market, stuffing their little truck with sacks of plantains, onions, and potatoes. Then it's a 20-minute drive to the Agrupa warehouse in the low-income neighborhood of Bosa.
One day, Agrupa is going to have an amazing big warehouse. Today, we have a garage because that's all we need. So there's like a crossover of unloading, loading, getting the truck ready for the day, and then we start the deliveries round, basically passing by each of the shops that have ordered from us.
Today, Carolina and Verena have plantains and onions for Carlos. He has fewer trips to the central market because of Agrupa. Plus, he gets lower prices and better quality.
Pues me gusta por el modo que ustedes tratan a los clientes, por la buena mercancía que dejan y por el modo del pago.
If we think about sort of strategically what does Agrupa want to be, it's an ally of those shop owners. It's like a good friend that helps them grow their business, that has their interest in mind and not the opposite.
Me queda más tiempo a mí para descansar y para de pronto, digamos, compartir con mi familia porque pues a esa hora pues ya mi familia está trabajando.
Aparte de la sencillez de ustedes, de la chica que le colaboran, del señor conductor, pues eso es como una familia.
To build the Agrupa family and bring lower prices and better food to the people of Bosa, Carolina and Verena turned to Agora Partnerships for help. Agora is a nonprofit organization. In Latin America and the Caribbean, it creates system change by supporting entrepreneurs who are working to solve social and environmental problems. Select entrepreneurs from across Latin America are admitted into a 4-month program called the Agora Accelerator. Agora consultants help the entrepreneurs grow by strengthening their business plans, expanding their networks, and connecting them with investors. It all starts with a week-long entrepreneurs retreat in Nicaragua.
It's just beautiful to see that many driven, inspired people all around. But to know that other people are fighting the same fight in other countries, but they're in the same boat in the end, it's something really calming to know, and it's great to have that network to fall back onto.
What I like most about Agora is the fact that they take the time to assign a person to your project that will actually get really involved with what you do. Understand not only your business, but also the people involved in the business, so us as co-founders.
In a country with more than 300,000 mom and pop shops, Carolina and Verena believe their business has unlimited opportunity to grow. And the simple but powerful idea behind Agrupa can work far beyond Colombia.
I see a huge potential for Agrupa in the entire world. The mom and pop shop problem happens everywhere in the world, and I believe no one can do anything else if they're not properly fed. So that's where we will start.
In a valley 300 kilometers from Bogota, Cali is a fast city of motorbikes and mountains. But in the hillside neighborhood of Polvorines, pavement gives way to dusty roads. There's no running water. Homes are made of tin, brick, and scrap metal. Civil war forced many people to flee their houses in the countryside and piece together new lives here.
The community is made up of approximately 2,000 families. Not a single one of these families have formal title for their property. The people actually build their homes literally brick by brick over time.
Matt Alexander grew up in the United States, but here he's Mateo, impassioned social entrepreneur and co-founder of a company called Suyo. Suyo means yours. Up to 75% of Colombians live in properties they don't legally own. For a fair price, Matt helps people in Cali and other cities get formal title to the properties they've worked so hard to build.
Their biggest asset, and in many cases their only asset, still isn't something that is in their name. When they pass away, their children cannot gain access to that asset, and they're essentially starting over again. So you're perpetuating the cycle of poverty.
In Polvorines, the people feel forgotten. With no legal title to their properties, they can't apply for loans for things like renovations or starting businesses. And they're always under the threat of eviction. Suyo is helping community leader Dubiener Gayan get title to his property so he can build a better future for his family and neighbors.
Pues la afectación que tenemos en cuanto a todas las familias es las enfermedades que están ocurriendo por el polvero que hay. ¿Sí? Los niños en cuanto a la vista, la laringe, todo eso están afectando porque hay mucho polvo. Entonces, ya estando esto regulado con su escritura pública, ya entraría el gobierno a hacer lo que es acueducto, alcantarillado y vías y todo mejoraría para la comunidad.
Suyo is like a one-stop shop. When someone decides to apply for title, the company sends a sales rep, David, to the home for an assessment using an app.
He basically captures all the data we need to analyze the property and prepare the claims in the different government institutions.
Next, Suyo's lawyers, architects, and engineers go into historical detective mode. It can take months to get to this moment, when the land title document goes to a notary for the final stamp.
Tenemos algunos consultorios jurídicos, pero no abarcan lo que ustedes están haciendo, ni prestan la ayuda ni colaboración como lo hacen ustedes en un seguimiento tan interesante.
As a social enterprise startup working with underserved populations, Suyo needed help. For Matt, Agora Partnerships was a perfect fit.
Agora's focused on our region, Latin America, so they understand our market well. They deploy a consultant to the field to work with us, really as a team member. Our consultant actually became a senior strategist for our team and participated in weekly meetings around strategy and networking and the business model itself. Every company is unique, and they assess where you're at in your growth, and they customize their support for your profile.
And with Agora's help, Suyo gets to make moments like this. Maria is getting legal title to her flower shop and home. She's wanted this for 10 years.
¿Cuáles beneficios traen eso?
La verdad, todo. Nos trae absolutamente todo, más que todo seguridad. Porque antes estábamos, era como flotando. Ahora pues uno ya se siente más seguro de que hay algo y que hay un soporte, que está algo en este de propiedad que uno ya cuenta que es de uno.
It seems like something very simple. It's a piece of paper at the end of the day, but what that paper represents for their future is really transformational.
Agora Partnerships helps unleash the potential of social entrepreneurs who are building market-based solutions to society's greatest problems. These entrepreneurs challenge outdated ways of doing things and chip away at the walls between rich and poor. They show empathy, agency, curiosity, and perseverance. They trust their potential and fight to realize their dreams. When it comes to eliminating poverty, ending climate change, and fighting inequality around the globe, they know we're all in this together. People in Cali and other cities get formal title to the properties they've worked so hard to build.
Their biggest asset, and in many cases their only asset, still isn't something that is in their name. When they pass away, their children cannot gain access to that asset, and they're essentially starting over again. So you're perpetuating the cycle of poverty.
In Polverines, the people feel forgotten. With no legal title to their properties, they can't apply for loans for things like renovations or starting businesses, and they're always under the threat of eviction. Suyo is helping community leader Dubian Ergayan get title to his property so he can build a better future for his family and neighbors.
Pues la afectación que tenemos en cuanto a todas las familias es las enfermedades que están ocurriendo por el polvero que hay. ¿Sí? Los niños en cuanto a la vista, la laringe, todo eso están afectando porque hay mucho polvo. Entonces ya estando esto regulado con su escritura pública, ya intentaría el gobierno hacer lo que es acueducto, alcantarillado y vías y todo mejoraría para la comunidad.
Suyo is like a one-stop shop. When someone decides to apply for title, the company sends a sales rep, David, to the home for an assessment using an app.
He basically captures all the data we need to analyze the property and prepare the claims in the different government institutions.
Next, Suyo's lawyers, architects, and engineers go into historical detective mode. It can take months to get to this moment, when the land title document goes to a notary for the final stamp.
Tenemos algunos consultorios jurídicos, pero no abarcan lo que ustedes están haciendo ni prestan la ayuda ni colaboración como lo hacen ustedes en un seguimiento tan interesante.
As a social enterprise startup working with underserved populations, Suyo needed help. For Matt, Agora Partnerships was a perfect fit.
Agora's focused on our region, Latin America, so they understand our market well. They deploy consultants to the field to work with us, really as a team member. Our consultant actually became a senior strategist for our team and participated in weekly meetings around strategy, networking, and the business model itself. Every company is unique, and they assess where you're at in your growth, and they customize their support for your profile.
And with Agora's help, Suyo gets to make moments like this. Maria is getting legal title to her flower shop and home. She's wanted this for 10 years.
¿Cuáles beneficios traen eso?
La verdad, todo. Nos trae absolutamente todo, más que todo seguridad. Porque antes estábamos, era como flotando. Ahora pues uno ya se siente más seguro de que hay algo y que hay un soporte, que está algo de propiedad que uno ya puede coger de uno.
It seems like something very simple. It's a piece of paper at the end of the day. But what that paper represents for their future is really transformational.
Agora Partnerships helps unleash the potential of social entrepreneurs who are building market-based solutions to society's greatest problems. These entrepreneurs challenge outdated ways of doing things and chip away at the walls between rich and poor. They show empathy, agency, curiosity, and perseverance. They trust their potential and fight to realize their dreams. When it comes to eliminating poverty, ending climate change, and fighting inequality around the globe, they know We're all in this together.
Technical problems or no technical problems, what a great inspirational 10 minutes those are. It's just great. All right, well, I'm joined by two great guests who will give us a lovely opportunity to talk about a lot of the issues that were brought up in this just 10-minute powerful movie. Just a more deep introduction of Luis Alberto Moreno. He assumed the presidency of the Inter-American Development Bank in 2005, and during his tenure, I've watched the IDB really transform as an organization with generational change, with more women in leadership posts, with a reinforcement of transparency issues and accountability that I think has been a hallmark of your presidency. And I think the other big hallmark of his presidency has been this sense of, rather than going deep into infrastructure or deep into social issues, is looking at cross-cutting initiatives such as sustainable energy and climate change, or emerging cities, or opportunities for the majority, or Connect Americas. I think these are really have been great changes at the IDB. I know Luis Alberto since he was Minister of Economic Development and then ambassador here in Washington, D.C., where he probably still get the Oscar as the best ambassador to Washington, D.C., where the relationship between the United States and Colombia became much larger, much more important, and it became really a strategic partnership that has remained until today. Ben, welcome to the Atlantic Council. After working as a Presidential Management Fellow at the Office of Management and Budget, Ben went to the Columbia Business School and launched Agora Partnerships. Since graduating in 2005, Ben has been named a Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation Entrepreneur, a BMW Foundation Young Leader, an Ashoka Fellow. He was a Social Venture Network Innovation Honoree in 2009 and named one of the top 10 under 40 development leaders in Washington, D.C. I had lunch with Ben a couple of weeks ago, and his enthusiasm and his determination is completely infectious, and for those of you who don't know him, he will infect all of you today as well. So I have Luis Alberto here, and so I'm going to just begin by talking about Colombia and how you see this issue, because I think it has a lot to do, we'll talk about business and involvement of civil society, but it has a lot to do, peacemaking and peace building have been two different things in Colombia. And so what is the need? We all have a sense of this impending peace that's coming. But what are the needs going to be in terms of making and building this peace? What are the needs in terms of what are the development needs for the country? Both in terms of money's needed, but where are the efforts going to be needed? Who's going to make the priorities? Who's going to do the choosing? And how can the IDB participate in that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, Peter, and thank you for your introduction. It's always good that all my colleagues from the bank listen to all the wise things he says about me.
Very wise.
But anyways, thank you to Bridget and to all my colleagues from the IDB who are here, and for all of you, and of course being here with Ben, that really, as you saw from the video, but more importantly, he really deserves all of our support. Now, speaking of Colombia, but really if you frame this in any kind of peace agreement anywhere that we've seen throughout the region, I think there are two very distinct dynamics. One is the dynamic of the negotiation itself, which is perhaps the phase in which the Colombian government and the FARC have been in for almost now 4 years, or 3 years plus. And the other one is the one I attribute the most importance, which is the actual implementation. And if there's any lessons learned from peace processes throughout Latin America, is that problems really occur is in the implementation phase. And as far as I'm concerned, I think the largest challenge for Colombia is not the dynamic alone of peace with the FARC, but peace in every regard from all Colombians. And I think that really begins from the bottom up. And so if you begin to kind of walk down this path, there is clearly a question of what does the post-conflict mean? And, frankly, I've heard a lot of ideas, but I think it's very important to have a sense of, one, what can the government of Colombia realistically do? I think there's tremendous amounts of limits as to how much in today's world, given how the Colombian economy has transformed, where you can really get a huge support from the international community. I believe the bulk of the effort is going to come from the Colombian people. And it is going to be in that deep Colombia where historically we haven't invested. And it's very simple. 5% of the Colombian population lives in the equivalent of 50% of our territory, which is probably the size of the state of Texas. That whole area has huge amount of natural resources, but equally was the areas where the FARC were able to grow and prosper by their linkages to cocaine, et cetera, and all the other things that we know. And I think in those areas, the big deficits are in public goods. What do I mean by public goods? I mean basic rural transportation, basic provision of water and sanitation, basic provision of rural electricity, provision of schools. And this is not rocket science. We at the IDB have seen the transformation that the synchronization of these kind of investments can make in other countries. And I'll give you two examples. One is the northeast of Brazil, where by now we've probably invested over $10 billion. Today, the northeastern of Brazil, which is a region of about 54 million people, a total of 8 states, is probably still the highest growth region. And this happened largely by the combination of smart government investments that were synchronized and that, in essence, allowed the development of those regions. And equally true is the so-called Norte Grande provinces of Argentina. Same thing. They're, of course, less in population, about 20 million people, about 7 provinces. And again, we've done the exact same kind of investments. And this is the kinds of things that one needs to really begin to have regions to build and prosper. And of course, it is going to be in the way of how do you get entrepreneurship going.
Right.
And these kinds of things that Ben has demonstrated to us today, like we saw in the 2 cases, one in Bogota, one in Cali. But it's really how do you move that whole nucleus of entrepreneurs, which unfortunately there's many of them who fail. There's many of them who, if they don't fail, they don't have access to finance. And more importantly, that they need a lot of support to really prosper. What kinds of supports do they need? They need to be connected to some value chain, which is part of what Ben has been working on. And they need to be resolving problems. And I certainly think, as you saw in both cases, technology will play an increasingly important part, where you can begin to understand these market failures, where entrepreneurs can fill precisely that space.
Well, let me bring Ben in exactly into that conversation. So let's take a wide-angle look first and talk a little bit about how you see entrepreneurship in the region, because I think it really, if you read the newspapers today, many people would say, oh, Latin America is a region in crisis. Or is it really a region in opportunity for entrepreneurship? How do you see entrepreneurship, and how do you see entrepreneurship's role in building exactly the things that Luis Alberto was talking about, in building a longer-term prosperity?
Yeah, well, I think well, first of all, it's just great to be here. It's a real honor for me to be on the stage with both of you, so thank you both. I think that for any good entrepreneur, crisis is always an opportunity. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in Latin America, in part because it's a very entrepreneurial region, always has been, mostly by necessity. But now you're seeing this new movement, as Bridget mentioned, really emerging. And it's a movement of entrepreneurship, and in particular of social entrepreneurship. I think that there is a hunger, especially among the younger generation, to have a life of purpose and meaning. And that means that they are not willing to work for just any company. And often they're finding that they need to actually create their own businesses and do their own thing. And so this kind of third way of social entrepreneurship, for-profit, in our case, for-profit companies that are intentionally solving a social problem. So they're looking at how do they create shared value? How do they create value for their investors? How do they create value for their employees? How do they create value for their customers, in particular low-income populations? And how do they also create value for the environment? So this is happening. This is a thing. It's happening. And our challenge is, how do we actually support those entrepreneurs who are out there on the front lines trying to raise capital? And we can talk about how you do that. It's complex. It requires, I think, an integrated approach. But it's very exciting time. And there's so many business models out there that are really looking at how can we solve a social problem in a sustainable way. And if you can figure that out, like Juan Fermin did in Guatemala with a company called Kingo, what problem is he trying to solve? 500,000 families in Guatemala have no access to electricity. Talk about basic services. You can't teach your kids to read if they have no access to electricity. He's figured out a way to get clean solar technology to these households. They're delivering about 1,400 units every month, and he's reducing their energy costs by 92%. And he's making money. So that is a win-win-win for everybody, and those are the kind of businesses that I think we need.
So I think I want to pick up on this issue of generational change. And Colombia has had really an amazing opening to the world since the 1990s when you were a minister. And it is a country that has brought in huge amounts of foreign investment in that time. It's about to accede to OECD and join the club of the countries that follow the rules, supposedly. But really what I would like to speculate a little bit on is this issue of how new generations, because that has been mostly government work. Now it's time for new generations to actually do the work of entrepreneurship. How do you see the new Colombia developing in terms of opening up for opportunities for young people, and how does this juxtapose with the older Colombia? I mean, Brexit certainly taught us that there's massive differences between old and young, and some of those exist as well in Colombia.
Oh, no question. And I like to pick up on something that Ben said that I see all the time. And perhaps I see it with my kids. You and I are from a different generation. But this millennial generation truly has a sense of purpose. And that perhaps to me is what I admire the most. And I see them in the bank. I see the most innovative people in the bank, which we have a lot of, are younger generation. They really come to the bank because they think they can have a true impact, and that their life can be one life of purpose and of meaning and of change, and to really improve people's lives. And I think this is the undercurrent that I see everywhere. Younger generations, of course, are different, depends on where you're at. But for those who are educated, for those like Ben who had a great opportunity, doing this is, it's God's work in many ways. There are others like him who never had the opportunity of an education. And for those, that's really the challenge of how to connect them into the new world. And clearly, in my view, technology is a great enabler. Because when you describe, Colombians are entrepreneurial at their heart in many regards, for the good and the bad, as we have seen. Unfortunately, the bad have been very good entrepreneurs. And, this is the part that I think that we need to talk a lot about. Ben seeing this from his perspective. I am always thinking, how can you scale up some of these ideas that you just saw? How can you give these girls in Agrupa not one warehouse, but really a system of distribution that can empower people? And today you can do that. And the one question that I always have is, how does that happen quicker? Mm-hmm. And to me, connecting them to value chains and developing value chains with these concepts in mind, in whatever area you're working on. We're talking about public services. I was talking to the new president of Peru about 10 days ago, and his focus is on water, as you know. He always was. He basically created a foundation with the support of the MIF. I was saying, beyond the big projects and being able to map, the watersheds and all the failures across the system, there's this huge space of innovation that is taking place on the delivery of water services. Take plasma, for instance, a project that we're actually looking at the bank. We're providing a grant for that, or systems of reverse osmosis that can help small communities, or places where you can bring energy with solar power to mining towns in the middle of the Andes in Chile. So all of these areas are spaces for entrepreneurs like the ones that Ben is supporting. And so I think this is the one point that I'm always thinking about. How can we scale this up faster? And the only way to do it is to understand what makes a business model successful, and equally to be able to replicate it throughout. At the end of the day, in the space of technology, what matters is volumes. So if we're thinking for a solution for Colombia is one thing. If we're thinking of a solution for the Spanish-speaking people in this hemisphere is another. Because the second largest market of Spanish-speaking population is actually here in the United States, and it's worth $2 trillion. So these are the kinds of things that I think we need to get into our DNA to be able to really begin to scale up these experiences. And I think clearly in Colombia, there will be a lot of space to do just that. And I think it takes also a regulatory change, because what all of these entrepreneurs are going to want is a level playing field where they can compete. Mm-hmm. And I think the government has a very important determining factor on cases like, for instance, payment systems. How do we change payment systems as we know them? Banking is the one that is going to be, in my view, in the next 15 years, the most revolutionized. And that means that banking offices as we know them are going to probably be turned into everything but a bank. And what you have is a technology company that provides financial services.
I get laughed at by my colleagues because I go deposit checks, right? And who goes to deposit checks anymore? Ben, can you pick up on this question that how do you scale, right? How does one scale from what these two people are doing in Agrupa to something much larger than that? But I also want to ask a question about the second about Suyo, because the whole issue of property rights. I mean, I studied this when I was at SAIS. I mean, it still continues to be, Hernando de Soto brought it to us. Yep. I mean, it continues to be one of the major challenges, particularly in Latin America, because everything changes when you own the piece of paper. So talk about scale and talk about how do you own both your home, your business, or your business is in your home often.
So scale, scale is one of the most important words in all of this, because if we can't scale ourselves and scale these companies, then what are we doing? This is about helping high growth companies so they can become role models and leaders. And the key, if you're growing a company, is to make sure that you have the right strategy and that you build a strong foundation so you can get the right people. And so many companies are on this hamster wheel, and they are always struggling because the cash flow is not coming in and they can't hire the right people until they get that payment, and you can never build a strong foundation. And so what we try to do at Agora is put the pause button on the company for a little bit, take a step back, look at your business holistically, bring in real experts to help you, and then understand what capital do you actually need. Sometimes entrepreneurs think they need a lot of money, but they don't. Other times, they need much more money than they think they do. And so we approach the scale question by trying to build a strong foundation so that these companies can raise external capital. We have a big investor network that we can leverage. We work with the MIF as well, but it's about a foundation for scale. And certainly connecting with larger corporations, getting our companies inserted in their value chain is a great strategy, and we do a lot of work to do precisely that. And to the issue of property rights, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I saw the video, one of the moments that resonated most with me was when Maria, the shopkeeper, said that before she sort of felt like she was floating, right? Because she didn't feel that security. And I think with property rights, like anything else, when you know that you have that piece of paper, it allows you to do things like establish a credit history, to pass on your house to other people, to your kids, to rent out your house, to access social services. I was talking to Mateo about his company just earlier today, and he was saying actually that many people are not eligible for social services until they can show that they actually live somewhere and that they own property. And so the impact, he's worked with about 2,000 homeowners, and the impact on their everyday life is tremendous. And I think it's that lifting of that insecurity which so many people face, and that fear that so many people face, which, you know, for us here in Washington, in our little bubble, we may not think about it, but it is a daily challenge for so many people in the world. And so I'm a huge fan, and I can tell you that this company, Suyo, you know, when they started with us, they had 5 employees about a year and a half ago. Today, Mateo told me they have 20 employees. They're growing very fast, and they raised in the last 8 months about $580,000.
How do they make money?
They make money by they charge the entrepreneurs not that much money, and they are going to make money through scale. So they're not profitable right now, but they have a business plan that's very aggressive. They want to kind of really dominate this market in Colombia in the next 2 years, and they want to expand. But because they're facilitating information flow and lowering the cost of critical information, a lot of impact investors are recognizing just the value of this service and are eager to support the company. But again, you know, this company, I believe, will be very profitable, but there are lots of business models that are worthy of investment that are not, you know, tech-based. Well, they're tech-based, but that are not all about, you know, going public in 3 or 4 years. Right. And so I think that a theme of what social entrepreneurs are doing in Latin America is they're actually solving really important problems. And they're doing it in a sustainable way. And whether that creates a unicorn or just a company that can, you know, hire a couple hundred people, if they are providing a critical product or service, those are the kind of role models that we need to support.
I want to bring all of you into the discussion in just a moment. I have one question that I want to ask. So we keep coming back to the scale issue. So how does the IDB help create scale? And how does the IDB not mean beyond the issue of money and funding, but how does the IDB actually help move governments to a regulatory position that sort of really facilitates not only the creation of more of these companies, but allows these companies to really grow?
Well, I would say we have a family of services that we provide, both from the public side and the private side. We fund people like Ben and what he's trying to do with Agora. And, you know, that's a very important piece of it. But equally, in the areas where he operates, he might very well run into regulatory issues that even the government doesn't understand. And here, I think a multi-sectoral approach is the challenge that we have to be able to go into a country and understand, you know, if you move the dial on all these different areas, access to finance, which is critical, issues of property values. I mean, when Ben is describing what he was just saying, I was thinking to myself, the logical linkage of this titling company should be some kind of financial institution on the other end. Because those people now have an asset under which you should be able to bank, which is the whole Hernando de Soto theory, which we have read all the books, but nothing like this, in a systemic way has happened. So he's been very good at addressing the issue, but the question is, how do you put that in black and white? And things of scale that we have done, I'll just give you a couple of examples. In Mexico, where sunflower seeds were produced years ago, they disappeared. And then PepsiCo, which is a big mass marketer, which has both a beverage side but also a food product side, uses this for their so-called Sabritas brand, which is the Frito-Lay concession that they have there. And we finance over 10,000 producers of sunflower that would go directly from the sunflower producer, and they would have the purchasing power of Pepsi, assuring that there would be an order on the other side. So automatically what you're doing is two things. You're cutting the whole system of intermediaries, you're providing finance, you're providing technical assistance, and therefore the productivity increases. The other one, and is something I feel very proud that we did at the bank, because it's extremely difficult, just to mention another case, we have a large number of them, is what we did with Coca-Cola in the case of Haiti. Soon after the earthquake, I coincidentally met with the chairman of Coca-Cola. He asked me, what should we do? And I said, you have all this beverage company, you have, the biggest export of Haiti on agricultural production was always mangoes. And so today we have over 12,000 farmers who produce mangoes strictly around the chain that has been developed with Coca-Cola and the IDB and a grant that we provided through the MIF. And the other thing that happens is that for every dollar that they make, over and above the cost goes back into the system. It started as beverages, now it's just pure mangoes that go through a retailing distribution of some of the big retailing markets here. So these are examples of things that you can do. And I mention that because everything in Latin America is difficult, everything in Haiti is impossible. Right. And so, just getting this done was a huge deal.
So Ben, I'm going to offer you a unique opportunity here. I'm going to offer you the opportunity to give some advice to the president of the IDB in front of all of these people too.
Especially my colleagues, because they should be listening more.
How has your experience been with the IDB? And most importantly, from your experience, what advice can you give the IDB to do exactly what Luis Alberto was talking about, to scale faster, to move governments, to move municipal governments? What advice would you give?
Well, it's probably to continue to empower some of the young people in the IDB to be able to express their own creativity in their own job as they're connecting with a lot of these ecosystem actors that are emerging. What I think is an incredible opportunity right now for all of us is to really focus, not just on an individual company or individual vertical, but on building the whole ecosystem. And that means focusing on individual leadership. We didn't talk about it, but leadership is really key. We need to find not just entrepreneurs, but great leaders who will be the future role models of the country. It's about culture building. It's about supporting enterprises where they are with access to capital, and then it's about building the whole market and the whole ecosystem. And so I think we are really lucky to be able to work with the IDB as IDB is the most influential development finance actor in Latin America and has a reputation globally as one of the most innovative development finance banks. And so we are very lucky to be able to work with the IDB. And I think that why our partnership is working is because we have a kind of small, nimble social enterprise that's very ambitious, and we have an equally ambitious, large, more bureaucratic organization that has a huge footprint all across Latin America. But we are working, I think, at the staff level to try to co-create. And instead of each being in our own silos, to listen So we have learned a lot from the IDB about where there are real areas of opportunity in urban innovation, in particular civic engagement. We're going to create a whole new track to focus on that in particular. And we're doing that working hand in hand with staffers from. And so I think that that is a great model of how a large institution and a smaller, maybe more nimble in some ways, social enterprise that is very focused on entrepreneurship can kind of work together and exchange information. And then the last thing I would say is scale. I mean, our partnership with the IDB is allowing us to double the amount of companies that we work with from 25 this year to 50 next year and for the next couple years. So it's been a really great partnership, and I'm just excited, to be here with you guys and to continue to work, because the work is just, it's like you said, Luis Alberto, with the Colombian peace process. The challenge is sort of implementation. Well, the challenge with entrepreneurship is execution. And it's having time to execute and having the people to execute, because you're always running and running and running. And so this partnership with IDB has actually given Agora some time, ourselves to take a step back, ourselves to be really strategic, to hire the right people. And that has been catalytic to our own growth. So thank you.
Let me open it up to questions, comments, join the discussion, please. Let me begin with the gentleman here. A mic is going to come to you, and if you would tell us your name and your affiliation.
Okay, my name is Seth Konowitz. I'm here representing myself. I'd like to congratulate on the documentary. I think it reads a subsequent documentary that really goes into more detail on each case and some of the more different aspects. I have a pretty significant experience dealing with Colombians in my past. So the questions come out of that, and the questions are for the head of Agora. Knowing Colombia as I do, I'm just wondering what was sort of the business model or the thinking to overcome some of the impediments and obstacles I could point to. I mean, just in Bogota, security situation, transporting different products. Did you consider that beforehand? Or in the case of Medellin, corruption's an issue in Colombia. How do you get things through the judiciary? What sort of policy? And the second question is, why focus on Medellin and Bogota when I know there are lots of peasants, campesinos in the countryside who would benefit from having title to the land, especially in places just in Valle de Cauca or Meta department. Anyway,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I think the problem that Mateo is solving around property rights is a very important problem, and that's one of the main reasons why we were attracted to this company, to Suyo, and to accept them into our program. But in general, I would say our real focus is on the individual entrepreneur and the team. So all of those challenges that you mentioned, which are all very real, these are challenges that the entrepreneur is dealing with on a daily basis. And so we see our role not in telling them what to do, but in listening to them and having a bit of a Socratic conversation with them around business strategy. And so if they need connections because they have a problem with this aspect of their business model, we see our role as to try to give them advice, and if we don't know, connect them with people who do know. So to answer your question, I can't answer the specifics about every business because every entrepreneur everywhere, including in the United States, faces challenges. For us, it's about finding the right entrepreneur and then trying to create a scaffolding of support around them to help them.
Other questions? I want to move sides if there's one here. If not, happy to go to the lady back there.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Colleen Dybel of Vita Global. We're a social impact advisory company and a benefit corporation that work with social responsible nonprofits and for-profits. So my question actually is for Ben. I'm curious and was excited to see that 12 of the companies you work with are B Corps or certified B Corps. So I was wondering why they become B Corps and how they've been able to leverage that certification to grow and expand their businesses.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we are huge fans of the B Corp movement. Actually, we created a venture capital fund in 2006, which was a founding B Corp. And so we have actively encouraged the growth of the B Corp movement in Latin America, and we work very closely with Sistema B, which is the Spanish language affiliate of B Corp. We have had B Corp representatives at our retreats. We actually have about 45 companies have been certified with Gears rating. We decided not to continue that because we didn't feel like the entrepreneurs were getting the value out of it. But we make it as easy as possible for our entrepreneurs to become B Corps. We actually have a whole module on it and work very closely. And this is part of partnerships. It's like nobody can do this alone. We're all in this together. We have to help each other and create this mutually reinforcing virtuous cycle.
I can't help but to go back to the gentleman's first question, because something just kept, I've been to Colombia so many times, and this whole issue, it's a hugely urbanized country. And therefore, the rural part of Colombia often gets left behind. I mean, how does one, particularly now with the peace implementation coming, the peace building, how does one make sure, because it's the rural areas that often have created a lot of the issues, the political issues for Colombia. How does one balance the fact that a lot of the political power lives in cities, but a lot of the political need is in the rural area?
Well, the first thing is that everything in the rural areas is at least 3 times more difficult than in the urban areas. So it's no surprise that most of his entrepreneurs are in urban areas because, there is density.
Right.
So just a simple example. For instance, with Semana Magazine, one of the main magazines in Colombia, they wanted to really take an area of Colombia which had a horrible massacre, a village by the name of El Salado. And because they're a very well-known magazine, they were able to convene a huge number of foundations. But the things that they could never resolve was, how do you get the roads? How do you get the electricity? How do you get the basic things for an area that was fundamentally agricultural and that you could not take products to market? And that, in essence, requires, we did it, for instance, in the state of Antioquia. We rebuilt about 3,000 kilometers, which is almost going throughout the whole country back and forth, for $60 million. And all of a sudden, you had people, and actually talk to them, who would take 5 hours to bring up products from one area to the next. Now they could do it in an hour and a half. So it's little things like that that are way above anything that Ben can do, but are determinant in terms of how this fabric of social entrepreneurs can really grow and prosper. And this is the one thing that you cannot be divorced from. And this, my obsession when I was saying, we need at the bank to look at these problems in a more cross-sectoral way and a multi-sectoral way, is because if you don't, you're going to have a failure along the way. And certainly for a big organization working in teams, the way Disruptors work in social entrepreneurs, that is based on cooperation, that is based on learning by doing, which many times implies failure, is fundamental, and it's a very different kind of thinking. And I think a lot of what we have to learn from those ecosystems that are around innovation is precisely that. And so that to me is the big challenge for our organization, but more importantly, as you go into rural areas.
So I've been warned before we started that I shouldn't get too excited about the conversation because it will eat into the wine time. So I'm going to take one more question from this side.
She's been asking all the time. I'm going to defend her, so we can have her.
Look at the defender you have. Okay, please, go ahead, and then we'll come to you. We'll do both.
Thank you. Indira Masulo, I'm with World Resources Institute. My question is in regard of how big is the portfolio of projects and that the IDB and the MIF has right now is, and if they're thinking in expanding the portfolio of projects like Agora. And also, how long did it take to build the relationship between Agora and the IDB and the MIF?
Thank you. Why don't we take your question as well? And
thank you for this insightful conversation. My name is Sophie Anbril. I'm a research associate and website manager at the Council on Hemispheric Affairs. And my question is for Mr. Moreno. I would like to know, in order to ensure long-term profit and growth and sustainability in the region, does the IDB have standards or guidelines that it follows when allocating funds based on a country's governance and stability?
okay, so why don't we take the relationship first? How long did it take to build and your portfolio, and then you can talk about standards.
Well, he can talk a lot about the relationship. I'll tell you real quick. We work, by the way, with the World Resources Institute on a variety of areas. Normally, our processing time, and this is something Bridget is working on, is very long today. And we're looking, and she's promised me that we're going to shorten that in half. Now we got to make sure that she delivers. But this is basically point number one. Point number two, how much? It depends what areas of the bank, but clearly the MIF is deploying, roughly speaking, $80 million. About 60% of that is grants. The rest is equity investments and actual loans. And this is to support projects like those of Agora. Mm-hmm. But equally, we have a whole variety of financial services and some kind of technical cooperation that we do across projects. But these are largely on the public side, more so than in the private side. In terms of standards, clearly we are in a place where we have perhaps the highest set of standards that are the result of 48 shareholders, which are the family of shareholders that the bank has. And we, of course, strive to have the best standards possible. And the way we assure that is by basically making into conditions of our lending, be they for an equity investment with Agora to a major hydro project in Brazil. So all across public or private lending, we have this set of safeguards that we apply for a whole variety of areas that look at questions of transparency, of sustainability, of working with communities in areas from gender. I mean, we have a whole host of conditions that we look to. And more importantly, since we invest so much time into each project that we develop, we look for a basic set of standards that we want to achieve in terms of results. And this is an equally important part of every work that we do. That doesn't mean that every project delivers on the results we estimate, because development is not an exact science. You learn by doing a lot. But we have a results framework. We have ways to measure a lot of things that we do in the projects that we develop.
Do you want to say something about?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that first by saying that I think there are 4 basic principles that every entrepreneur needs to uphold to be successful, and these are principles that we look for in the entrepreneurs that we work for, that we serve, and that are in our program. And they are empathy, agency, curiosity, and perseverance. And I say that because our relationship with the IDB is definitely one of perseverance. Very, very important. We actually first met with the IDB about 10 years ago when we were pitching this high-risk, low-return, crazy venture capital
fund. He's one
fund.
guy who respects perseverance.
And we were not successful in that pitch, which I completely understand, but we kept relationships. And about 4 years ago, we started with OMJ, and they supported our program, and then the MIF did the following year, and then we did a lot of work to build this 3-year program. And so we're so happy to now be on the other side of that. It feels great.
So you went from perseverance now to perspiration, because they're asking you for delivery.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, exactly, because once you finally think, okay, we got it, well, actually now is when the real work begins. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody, but in particular, I want to take a moment to thank my colleague, Maria Fernanda Perez, who's in the back, whose idea this was, implementation this was. It's been a great event. Thank you all very much for coming. Please stay for wine and snacks. Thank you to my two panelists. It was great. Muchas gracias.